Good day. How are you? I hope everybody's fine, and I sure am. And what we're going to talk about first as we get into the analysis part is why is there a growing and important need for this? It isn't just hey, I got some time to spare, I'll do it. It's something you want to be actively thinking about because as time goes on, it's going to become even more and more important. What I'd like to do is just show you some of the things that are driving this importance. And we're going to take energy and economics and food as a kind of food will be the consequence, environment will be the consequence, but it's a drive for wealth, better living standards, and of course, if you just stop and think about it, energy consumption plays a major role in achieving that. If you take a look at this first graph I've got here, which shows energy consumption in the vertical axis and gross domestic product per capita in the y-axis or the horizontal axis, and both are on a per capita basis or a per person basis, what you observe is that the United States is way out there on the far right, a lot of GDP per capita, and using a bit of energy. And it makes sense, the more energy we have available to us, the more things we can do. And if we do things that will, produce wealth, why then it's going to raise the standard of living because we're going to be moving up in that Maslow's hierarchy of human needs, and there's stuff, image building, and all the rest that goes into play there. So there's economy being encouraged. And you can tell who's using their energy most efficiently if you just take a look at Singapore, Norway, and Switzerland. And you'll find they all have about the same GDP per capita, but the Swiss are using less energy per capita. So that's a measure of your country's efficiency in utilizing the energy it needs to maintain the economy it has. And that's a very important thing. So the point I'm trying to make with this graph is that, hey, look, the more energy we use per person, the better the economy of our country or our neighborhood or for us. And that's important because when they sit around and talk about world economics, what do we talk about? How fast is their GDP growing? Oh, the stock market's having a little trouble because China's GDP is slowing down or ours is slowing down, whatever, and people are worried about that because that has such an impact on the world marketplace. So, energy consumption per capita and its relationship to wealth is what you want to keep in mind. And, of course, to have some feeling for the great array of how that energy is consumed, all we have to do is look at the energy flow diagram, which we talked about before for the U.S. in 2012. And you can see that gives you some detail and some idea as to where the energy is going. And if we're kind of a model that people want to use, you can see how it should be distributed within the industrial and transportation sector to acquire the kind of economy we have. Well, the next picture I'd like to show is this is a wonderful graph. The world population of billions, and it's like nothing happened. Of course, I laugh because I wonder who was taking the census in 10,000 BC. But the fact of the matter is, after about the year, when the Romans were around, they were taking some census, so we have some idea. But after we got into the thousands and getting close to 2,000, we have some pretty good data, and it just skyrockets. It just goes up. Of course, the scale of this graph and the exponential nature of population growth in the world as it is today is highlighted graphically, and we'll see in the next after the next couple of pictures where it's not quite that dramatic. Well, one asks the question, well, gee whiz, the population's increasing. we saw that the U.S. and the Western world were doing pretty good in the GDP per capita, but China, Asia, Africa, and some other parts of the world are not doing very well. They're way in the lower left-hand corner of that picture. Well, where is the population growth going, and where are most of the people in the world living? And so if we look at this pie chart here on the distribution of the world's population in 2005, we see that China and India both growing. Indonesia and other Asia, my golly, that's more than half the world population, let alone Africa. Europe, USA, South America, that's a percentage, but maybe a third of the world's population, which is doing okay. So there's going to be a great demand for energy in that part of the world where there's the most population. Well, okay, but what's the consequence? Well, the consequence is the population is growing, people need food. Well, that's energy for us, isn't it? So they're cutting down forests and they're farming. I mean, you look at what's happening in Brazil, which is a major food producer for the world. Look what's happening has happened in the U.S. We're cutting down forests and agriculture. As a consequence, contributes to the rise in the carbon dioxide concentrations in the world today, because it's plants like trees that take carbon dioxide out of the air because of the photosynthetic process that produces the sugars, the starches, and things like that trees produce and plants produce for us. So trouble's afoot here. Well, thinking about that, gee whiz, we're using a lot more resources. We're polluting a lot more because we're not being very careful about it because of cost issues and one thing or another. And population is rising. Well, we'll continue to rise. And this last picture is interesting because it shows, yes, it could keep rising, but look, there's a fall off. We've said before that increasing wealth in a community tends to be the best birth control there is. People have less and less children, okay, because they want to get things. They want to have position. They want the stuff that relates to that Maslow's hierarchy again. And so they're willing to hold back on family or children to get to that point. Well, what else might be causing this downturn that you see in this figure? Food. We have to feed these people. This takes land, among other things. Of course, you can use greenhouses and the like where the production per acre is improved. But still, you're using land. And as a matter of fact, you'll find some countries actually are buying land in other countries to produce the food they need. And as a matter of fact, there's two things I'd like you to see relative to this issue. One of them is a book by Lester Brown. He's president of the Earth Policy Institute in Washington, D.C., and somebody you should listen to. The Earth Policy Institute puts out periodicals every year kind of talking about the state of the world, and he really addresses this issue of the coming food problems, full planet, empty plates. And in here he shows, for example, that, during this kind of last recession we had, food prices doubled, and therefore a lot of people couldn't get the food they needed. I mean, we have trouble with that in our United States here. Old people are saying, do I buy medicine or food? Life Care Alliance has a special program to take pet food to older people that are living at home because they can't afford to buy the pet food, so they give the pets some of their food that Life Care Alliance brings to their own detriment of their own health. So we have a program with Life Care that takes care of that. But this certainly is worth seeing and reading. I'll tell you, there's another one, and I really like National Geographic because they're getting more and more into things that naturally that affect culture, because that's what they're all about. And they have an issue, this last issue, this month of April 2014, that relates to this whole issue of food. And that's very good, and it will give you, in a short way, a good view of the fact that we are we're going to have problems meeting food needs. The other journal which turned out to be very good on the energy issue is another National Geographic that encapsulates the energy problem and pollution and its effect on the people that are, in this case, looking and mining coal. Coal, as you might guess, is very prevalent. It's easy to get, cheap, and easy to use. And so coal is going to be a major energy source for years to come, and The Economist just had an article about that. Just to give you an example of how coal is in itself, just from one country, is having an impact. China used 3.8 billion tons of coal in 2011. They're the largest users of coal in the world. China, India, and the United States are the three biggest users. But China, 3.8 billion tons. Well, how much is that? And I was thinking, what's a good way to demonstrate that? So I said, well, how many coal cars would that take? And if you made a train of those coal cars, would it go to the moon? So let's look. Typical coal car will hold 80 tons. And it's 50 feet long. The distance to the moon, at least when I looked it up on the web, was 238,900 miles. Okay, and there's 5,280 feet per mile. So just looking at those numbers, how many coal cars would be required to move 3.8 billion tons? Well, it turns out 47.5 million coal cars. What would be the length of the train? It would be very long, about not quite, less than 500,000 miles. Well, if we take the distance and divide it by how far to the moon, it turns out that 3.8 billion tons of coal in 1 year would require a train that goes to the moon and gets about 8/10 back from the moon to Earth. That is a long coal train. That is dumping lots of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. That is having an impact on global warming, along with all the natural events that are contributing as well. That is also having an effect, because of the pollution issue, on production of agricultural products. That, in turn, will cause a rise in prices. That, coupled to the fact that population is increasing, is going to cause stress, because the population is going to be living in a poorer environment. If they want to improve the environment, they got to raise the cost of the energy, but they're all driving to get a higher standard of living and a better GDP per capita. And so food costs are going up, pollution's going up, people that want it is going up, and we're going to have social stress. And that won't be good. So just from the energy standpoint, we better be doing some impact assessments. The value of that will be not only will we see, hey, we got a problem caused by whatever, but it also will give us a drive to define the need for new technologies. You know, like fish farming is on the increase. How do you increase the productivity from an acre? How do you produce energy with less pollution? And the whole idea of sustainability is gaining popularity, at least in this country. But you know, when you're down there at the bottom level of Maslow's hierarchy, you don't care if it's a lousy, stinky atmosphere. You want to get up that chain a little bit because you want a better lifestyle. You want a little more leisure. So I hope you can see why it is that we have to have more analysis, and you should be helping to drive that, because depending on what your ethical belief is to what's right and wrong that we do as humans, will determine to the extent at which you will get involved in the analytical aspect of things. Okay, the next time we get together, we'll talk about a case where a community said, hey, we want analysis.